So for any reason you are on TikTok and you need to switch over to YouTube, it's pretty petty politics, but we're gonna go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to week 8. Week 8. Let me start by saying I apologize if y'all were looking forward to it. To many videos this week, like little short courses. But y'all, I just rest. I did not have the capacity. I rest this week. And I binge watched some television too. But mostly I just rest. I didn't do anything like at all. So if you were looking, you were wondering what happened, nothing happened. You didn't miss anything. I just rest. There's still time. I could do some little minis, but I needed my rest this week. That's what spring break is all about. Give me 1 second. My mom is calling and I told her I would call her back. So what was I watching? So I binge watched 1923. There are 2 seasons. I binge watched 1923 and I started 1883. These are the prequels to Yellowstone. The prequels to Yellowstone. That is what I watched. All right. So this week we are, thank you, Valerie. Yes, resting is good and well deserved. Baby, resting. I saw an article. I've seen this online before, but I actually saw it again yesterday as an article. And it was talking about how rest and napping daily helps your body and helps your health, and it reduces like heart disease. So I'm like, well, good, because baby, if I don't do nothing else, I know how to get my rest. All right, I know how to get my rest. So yes. Okay, so emails have been sent. The course guide has been sent out this morning. And if you have not registered, please do so. Like, seriously, if you have not registered, please go ahead and get that done by going to the YouTube and under the, what is it called? Under the description, there is a Google form. If you complete that Google form, you will receive the weekly email. Generally, I try to send it the day before class. I always announce class at least a day or two before it takes place. Like I'll put a link up on TikTok for the live. But you can basically, if you don't get an email before Thursday, that means we're going to be on Friday. But in the email, it will always have the time will start, which is 10:20 Central Standard Time. But generally, we do this on Thursdays or Fridays. I think I like Fridays better because I'm not as rushed, but we'll stick to Thursdays or Fridays for our classes. So this morning's email included the course guide. So it's not a syllabus. Not doing that, but it is a course guide. And the course guide just provides an overview of what we've covered so far and what you can expect in the coming weeks. So the last 2 weeks we've been in Reconstruction. We're going to continue with Reconstruction today. Next week we're going to begin a transition out of Reconstruction and looking at Black codes. And then from there, we go into suffrage. We'll be in the 1920s, the 19 teens. So we'll be in the 19 teens and the 1920s. And we'll go from that into Jim Crow. From there, we'll look at the role of the media and its influence on government. We'll look at landmark cases. There are some significant landmark cases that I want to go over. Oh, you're fine, Marche. There are some significant landmark cases I do want to go over with you. And we've talked about a few, or I should say some significant cases. And then we'll look at political participation and elections, followed by foreign policy, and then a recap. Okay. And foreign policy, I'm saying this semester because I'm just thinking about like at work this semester. My foreign policy lecture and PowerPoint that I use in class, I have to revamp the whole thing because my goodness, how our foreign policy has changed so significantly in less than 100 days. It has changed so significantly in less than 100 days. And by the time I get to foreign policy for lecture purposes, it would have changed even more. There are just a lot of things, a lot of moving pieces that are taking place that can't be ignored, that we will discuss. But baby, when I tell you that part of our course guide is alive and moving, it is alive and moving. All right, looks like we're ready to go. Can we still have the old one before you change it? The old one, what, Cy Russell? My PowerPoint for my class? No, I can't give you that. So I can do a foreign policy document for our global classroom, but I'm very protective. I'm very protective of my works when I put them out into the public sphere. Not that I think you all would do anything, but I mean, I'm just real mindful of my intellectual property when it comes to that. I don't even like giving PowerPoints to my students. I rather just lecture. And it's because of the way our technology moves and does things. I'm even careful in how I speak on here because of the artificial intelligence. I'm working on being more trusting of this technology, and I don't know. I don't know. But anyway, I'll give y'all something. How about that? I will give you something. All right. So Reconstruction, just as a recap, what are our 3 Reconstruction amendments? Who can tell me our 3 Reconstruction amendments? Let's see who's going to go first. Is it going to come from YouTube? Is it going to come from TikTok? What are our 3 Reconstruction amendments? Hopefully it comes from YouTube simply because I want to be able to put it on the screen. So what are our Reconstruction amendments? What are our Reconstruction amendments? There we go. Courtney, 13 through 15. 13 through 15. Those are our Reconstruction amendments. And so I do want to talk about 2 things today as it pertains to Reconstruction. And that is voting and education. And how significant are those 2 things to the plight of our nation today, right? When we look at the plight of our nation today, voting and education are so significant, are super significant. Yesterday, President Donald J. Trump signed into effect basically an order to begin his limited, listen to my language, his limited dismantling of the Department of Education. Limited in he does not have absolute power, although some people think he does. He does not. He does not have absolute power, so he cannot fully dismantle the Department of Education. So my next question is, who has the power to eliminate the Department of Education? Who has the power to eliminate the Department of Education? Congress. Okay, Congress. That is correct. Thank you so much, Marche. And VBPW and user, whoever you are, 74361. I need you to get a name, baby. And Tori, thank you, thank you, thank you. Here on YouTube. Valerie and Courtney, yes, Congress has the power. So we spent a lot of time early on in this course talking about the various powers of Congress. And so when you're looking even in the amendments, you see the amendments refer back to what Congress can do. That is why I make it, and how can I put it? I make it a very aggressive reminder to you to focus on your representation, to focus on your 3 federal employees who serve you in Congress. And so who are those 3 federal employees? That is your 2 U.S. senators and your representative to the House of Representatives, or your representative in the House of Representatives. Those are your 3 federal employees, and they have so much power and responsibility in so many ways. So I want to pause before we really get into the theme of today as we talk about Reconstruction and education. So where is my pen? Give me 1 second. Let me grab a pen. As we talk about Reconstruction and education, I want to talk about Congress. All right, I do. I want to talk about Congress and what's going on with Congress right now. All right. What's going on with Congress right now? So right now in Congress, we have a number of vacancies in the House of Representatives. I think there are 4. Let me check. I think there are 4 in the House. How many vacancies are in the House of Representatives? I think there are 4 vacancies. Yes, there are 4 vacancies. And 2 of them, because, politics gonna always politic, 2 of them probably won't get filled anytime soon, including my U.S. representative seat. So I live in the 18th Congressional District in Texas. Our Congress member passed earlier this month. In fact, I attended his funeral just this past Saturday. That seat probably won't get filled anytime soon because governors can play politics, right? A special election can be ordered by the governor, and this is the same in New York. So I also want you to look at New York. New York has a congressional member of the House of Representatives who is being considered for a cabinet seat within the Trump administration, within this 47th administration. Because once she is confirmed, her congressional seat will be vacated. The governor of New York is like, well, I'm not about to fill that. And in the same way, the Texas governor is like, I'm assuming this is what they're like. I'm not about to fill that. I'm not about to put in place an election so that that seat can be filled, right? And what that does is it keeps Congress, meaning, and when I say Congress right now, I'm talking about the House of Representatives, it keeps that chamber very competitive. All right. So right now, there are 218 Republicans and 213 Democrats with 4 vacancies. Okay, with 4 vacancies. Now, if you've been paying attention in this course, you know that Congress or the House a lot of times has to have, what's the word I want to use? They have to have so many votes in order to make things happen, right? And so let's look at the 4 open seats. So the first one is Matt Gaetz. You know, Matt, because Matt likes, allegedly, he likes them very, very young. He resigned at the end of November, and he did not take, not at the end, but the 13th of November. And he did not get sworn in early this year for the 119th Congress, right? And then you have Michael Waltz, also from Florida, who resigned on the 20th of January. You have Representative Sylvester Turner, that would be my member of Congress, who passed away on March 5th. And then you have Representative Raul Grajavla of Arizona, who passed on the 13th of, so last Thursday, he passed away, right? So you have two Democrats who have died and 2 Republicans who have resigned. And then you have the lady in New York who can't be counted in this list, but essentially she's number 5 because she's going to pivot from the House of Representatives to a cabinet position. All right, so let's look at what our comments and questions are asking. I thought a Dem seat was just added due to a special election. Where do you think that took place, Rage? I'm just looking at our questions. Where did you think that took place? Because it may have. I'm just going by what is most up to date and current, right? So while we're waiting on her, so in the 21st district, so Congressional District 21 in Congress for the state of New York, the incumbent, Elise Stefanik, is presumably going to be a part of the Trump administration, becoming a U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. But she hasn't been confirmed yet. And so essentially, the governor, what's her name? I can see her face. But the governor of New York would need to order an election. And same thing here in Texas. People are waiting on Governor Abbott to order an election. If you watch my kitchen cabinet, which is also on the Pretty Petty Politics platform, but if you watch Kitchen Cabinet, we've talked about the 18th Congressional District. What I expect to happen is that the governor not give a special election because of Hochul. Thank you. Because of what's happening in the House of Representatives, because of that slim margin, it is to the benefit of, our governor is a member of the GOP, so it is a benefit to his party, which is led by the Speaker of the House. Anybody know who the Speaker of the House is? I'll give you a hint. It's MJ, but not Michael Jordan. But the Speaker of the House to like throw him an assist by keeping that number down, because we have one less. Yes, Mike Johnson. Thank you, Angela. We have one less member of the House of Representatives on the Democratic side. So this is an overwhelmingly Democratic seat. So we know that 99.9999999999997% chance of someone being elected to this seat that they will be a Dem, right? So because you want to keep that slim margin even wider, you would not have a special election. You would make us wait. And so essentially that's what we're doing. We just went through this last summer when when another member of Congress who had served the 18th congressional district for like 30 years, she passed away July 19th. We did not have a representative in the US Congress until after November 5th's general election. The governor ordered a special election in August, but he did not make it immediate. That special election was the same day as the general election, so it was just another slot on your ballot during the general election for those of us who live in the 18th congressional district to vote. Y'all see where I'm going with this? And so from July, so August, September, October, so for 3.5 months, we were without representation. I would not be surprised if we are without representation from March to November. So that's April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November. You can almost, 8 months. You can birth the baby in that time. A little premature, but in that amount of time, 8 months without representation. Okay. But again, we're looking at politics, right? So what can be passed? What powers are being revealed by Congress during this period? What is Congress through the House of Representatives? What are they able to get done because those numbers are so close? And that's why I always say elections have consequences. Elections have consequences. And this is not me saying this because of my own political ideals, but this is just reality. So when you elect people to office, you got to think of the whole gamut, right? When you elect people to office, you would hope that they would be true to their constituency. That we know that don't always happen, especially not in Congress. But November, 8 months away, a year from November, we have what we call the midterm elections. All right. The midterm elections. Hi, Ashley. So Ashley has a question. Could they possibly push it to the next big election in 2026? No, they're going to, it'll be during the next general election. And so general elections take place every November, the first Tuesday following the first Monday in November. All right. So if November 1st is a Tuesday, then the first Monday is the 6th. And so that Tuesday would be that first Tuesday following the first Monday would be the actual election. So the reason why they wouldn't push it to 2026, because in 2026, we have what we call primary elections. And VBPW, I'm coming to your comment next. We have what we call primary elections. And so here's the consequences. Congress is always up for re-election when it comes to the House of Representatives. Every other year they're running for office. You remember Article 1, the House of Representatives, they serve unlimited 2-year terms. Okay, unlimited 2-year terms. And so essentially they just got sworn in January, right? So this is the top of their 2 years. So 25 is year 1, 26 is year 2, and then it restarts January 2027. And that will be, for us, our 120th Congress. At the same time, with the Senate serves 6-year terms. And in their 6-year terms, like a third of the Senate is always up for re-election during either your midterm or during your general election. Okay, because it's a 6-year term. So some of our U.S. senators were just reelected this past fall, this past November. Next November, not this November, but next November, 2026, we will see about 30 some odd U.S. senators being up for reelection. What does this have to do with anything, Professor? Okay, I'm glad you asked. So as we go back to the Department of Education, I told you the president has limited powers. He does not have absolute powers, or the office of the president does not come with absolute powers. Although some people will have you convinced that it does or it should, and I will tell you it should not. But Congress has the power to stop. Congress has the power to agree and to green light things. And so depending on, and it can't just be one chamber of Congress, right? So depending on the outcomes of these special elections and the 2026 general election, it can shift the trajectory of our Congress. It could flip one chamber, or it could flip both chambers. We don't know. I don't know how engaged the constituency is. If I had to guess, I feel like a lot of people are just over it, because I wake up some days and I just be like, I'm over this foolishness. But it just depends on how we turn out to vote, particularly during these special elections, but more specifically during the midterm elections. So how does this affect Department of Education? The dismantling that is underway is limited. The Department of Education has been around my entire life. Arguably 3 generations of U.S. citizens and residents have matriculated through the Department of Education, if that makes sense. And we could argue 4, because we could kind of pull in baby boomers, because they may have been in college when the Department of Education was created. But if we're strictly looking at K-12, we're looking at the end of Gen X, which really isn't Gen X, is Zennials. So we're looking at Zennials, Millennials, and what's after them? Gen Z. And so that's 3. Millennial, Zennial, Millennial, Gen Z, and I think the last one is Alpha, right? So we're looking at these generations of our constituency having only known the Department of Education, right? So what does that look like to be taken away? Some people say, oh, it's returning public education to the states. The states have always controlled public education. It's always been ran by the states, public education, K-12. That's why every state has its own standardized testing. Like, we don't have like this uniform testing across the country. Every state does its own thing, its own curriculum. Now, there may be some federal guidelines, like during the Bush George W. Bush administration, we had some guidelines or policies that came from the administration down into the states, and that was No Child Left Behind. I don't even want to talk about that. But with these changes, it's not true when you hear people say, oh, it's returning public education to the states. Public education was always at the states. But what is happening is, if you have accommodations, disabilities, civil rights issues that arise in education, instead of them being managed through basically experts in education in those particular areas, it will be outsourced to other agencies, and it's setting a new precedence. And I'm being very mindful of my words. As someone who works in public education, yes, I'm in higher ed, but I'm still in public education. It is unnerving. It is frustrating. It is somewhat frightening. Um, but it is what it is. Uh, but let's look at, I'm ready to get back to the other part. Let's look at where we get the whole idea of public education from. And so we're going to return to Reconstruction. Okay. We're going to return to Reconstruction. Valerie says, but they have developed the Common Core state standards. Yeah, I said policies can get created, but overall, the states control their own education. They set the standards for certification and all of that. But Common Core is still a privately, how can I put this? Common Core is still like privately led, but adopted by states. I think that's the best way to put it. All right, so Reconstruction, education, right? How do the two go together? Any of y'all watch the documentaries? Has any of you watched the documentaries that I referred you to and I put in your emails? All right. So Robert Smalls was an enslaved man in South Carolina. Robert Small was enslaved in South Carolina, and what happened was he was very trusted by white people. He was very trusted and looked at as someone reliable. He was familiar. He was like a trusted enslaved person, right? So he had some, I wouldn't call them privileges, but he had some leeway, and he was exposed to a lot. And as he was exposed, he was learning. He was taking mental notes. He didn't really display that he was taking mental notes, but he was taking mental notes. He was very observant and became empowered through the knowledge that he received by his observancy. And so it had gotten to the point he was working on ships or boats, and the workers would leave at night, and they entrusted him on the boat. They allowed him to bring family members and other enslaved people, but they trusted him, and nothing had ever happened until something happened. So one day or one evening, he takes the boat, he puts on the captain's gear. Remember, he's been observing and learning. And so he knew which signals to give as he sailed from the Confederate territory up the Atlantic, along the Atlantic into Union territory. So he would give the signals. He knew what, how to horn or whatever to the different lighthouses and stations. So they knew that this was a friendly boat, so to speak. And once he got himself to Union territory, he surrendered the boat, gained his freedom, as well as those on the boat with him. And he later returned to South Carolina during Reconstruction. And one of the most significant facts, more significant than him serving in the South Carolina House of Representatives, more significant than him being elected to the United States House of Representatives, he started the first public schools in the United States. He started that in South Carolina. Now, I think I've said this to you before. Public education wasn't a thing in the United States. It's not something that was common. It did not exist. If you were educated, it was because your parents put money behind it and put you in school or sent you off to school. Okay. whether they sent you off to boarding school, like they sent you off to be educated. They put money behind it. So just think private schools. There were no public schools where people went and studied. We talked about this last week, and I talked about how you also see immediately after Reconstruction the creation and founding of what we call today, they weren't called this then, but what we call today historically Black colleges and universities. Many of these were land grant institutions, meaning the land they were built on were granted to them from the state. Some of them, the land was donated by private people or formerly enslaved people who had parcels of land, and they donated it to the creation of institutions of higher learning. And so you see these throughout. If you look at it from a historic standpoint, you see so many more over the years than you see present day. And that was because the need was different, the travel was different, and the way they served was different. That's one aspect. The other aspect is funding. Education is not cheap. So when we look at the Department of Education today in comparison to what Robert Small started back in the 1860s or 1870s, following during Reconstruction, you see needs being met, but you also see immediately after these schools are created, you start seeing where these schools are being attacked. And it kind of shows you why it's necessary to have some type of regulated organization. So prior to there being a Department of Education, it was, I want to say it was health. I'm closing my eyes trying to read my notes in my head. I want to say it was Health and Human Services and welfare was the name of the agency or the department that oversaw public education. And that was it for years until the late 70s when the Department of Education was formed. All right. So I want to make sure we understand the Department of Education has only seen about 4 generations: Zennials, Millennials, Gen Z, and Alpha. We're the only ones who've gone through K-12 or who are going through K-12. Older people, so millennials, baby boomers, the silent generation, they did not have the Department of Education. They know the Department of Education. Many of them have worked for the Department of Education. Many of them have sent their children through schools that are regulated through the Department of Education, but that was not their lived experience. I'm pretty sure it's the Health, Human Service, and Welfare. Okay. All right. So why y'all saying Gen X in the chat? I'm just trying to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. I'll see why y'all say that in a second. So as we look at the Department of Education, how was it created? Who created Department of Education? That's the first question. Who created the Department of Education? I agree, Demi, but the late 70s, people born like 78, I think it's 77 through 83, they're called Zennials. They were born in the 70s, but they're learning, their education, their life experience is more connected to millennial. And before that, we called it Zennial. All right, I see the answer being Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter. But who created it? He signed it into law, but who created it? Congress. There you go, Amber. Congress created it, right? Let's see what YouTube has. Same thing, the Carter administration. Yes, Jimmy Carter signed it into law, but Congress created it. That was an act of Congress. So back to what I was talking about, President Trump has done with his order. It's not an absolute dismantling of the Department of Education. In order for that to happen, he would need Congress. Problem with Congress right now is there are a few vacancies. There are 4, arguably 5 vacancies. Now, those 2 in Florida, those 2 resignations, those 2 Republican vacancies that were vacated by Republicans in Florida, they're up for special election here very soon. All right, they're up for special elections very soon. So 45 years ago, during the Carter administration, the Department of Education was signed into law by President Jimmy Carter, who just recently passed. So throughout his lifetime, from his signing to his death, the Department of Education was a thing that existed. Now it is something that is up in the air. And I'm trying to be very careful, and I'm just going to let loose in a second, but I'm trying to be very careful because this is personal to me. I'm raised by educators. I am an educator. I've devoted so much of my life to public service. This is not something I take very lightly, but I'm also mindful of the climate that we're in. So I have to be mindful of how I express things. So just bear with me. All right. So what do we do? How do you influence Congress at this point? You know, I gave you the numbers. What did I tell you the party breakdown was? 218 to 213 with 4 vacancies, possibly 5, with the lady out of New York joining the cabinet as the ambassador to the United Nations, right? That's going to come up in our foreign policy, by the way, here in several weeks when we get to foreign policy. But how can we impact that? How can you impact that if you don't live in Texas, you don't live in Florida, you don't live in New York or Arizona, and you don't live, or if you do live in those places, you don't live in those districts? How can you impact those elections? All right. Valerie says, contact your senators and state representatives. Well, your state representatives can't do anything about Congress, but your senators, they are part of Congress. So they will have to vote. So if something happened in the House, something happened in the Senate, they have to bring it to conference to align it. And then if they're successful, then it'll be presented to the president. President will either sign it or veto it. If he vetoes it, then Congress can take it back up by a vote and override his veto by a certain number of votes. Y'all remember what that is? Is it 2/3 or 3/4? How do you override a veto? Is it 3/4 or 2/3? It's 2/3. Thank you, Demi. It's 2/3. Okay. 2/3 in both chambers. So that's the House as well as the Senate. 2/3 vote. So how can you impact this if you're not in those districts? One, you can make phone calls on behalf of the candidate of your choosing. You can make donations. You can participate in online surveys and reach out to your friends and family members who may live in those districts. You can help people get registered to vote. Like, there are things that you can do, but at the end of the day, it comes down to those voters, those constituents, right? And so your member of Congress, though, even though you don't live in those districts, you need to hold your member of Congress accountable as it relates to the Department of Education. How many of you, and this is not about us as voters as much as it is about our elected employees, how many of you have received physical communication from your elected employee? So like, you're a member of the House of Representatives, or one of your U.S. senators sends you newsletters. Not newsletters that you signed up for and you get via email, but like something in the mail. Have you ever been notified about their town hall meeting through their office? Right? And for most people, the answer to these questions is no, right? But how do you make them be accountable? You need to sign up. All right. You got to sign up. So Emily, you live in Bernie's district, in his state. I'm sorry. Emily lives in, what's that, Vermont? Right. But for most people, the answer is no, none, never, right? And we can't ignore that reality. So how do you overcome that reality if they're not communicating with you? Well, they all have websites, so sign up to get their newsletters. I know you don't want no more emails, but you need to know. You need to follow them on social media. And like, so maybe you make a list. I don't even know. I haven't used Twitter regularly in years, but I used to make lists on Twitter. So there were certain, like, it was almost like creating a timeline inside my timeline, where I could just go to that list and it would show me just things related to that. So it would just show me my elected officials, what they're talking about, or my favorite bands, what they were talking about, what their concerts were. So we have to utilize technology in a way that keeps us informed, that keeps us engaged, so that we can know what our congressional members are doing when they're in town, when they're having town halls. For some, they don't have town halls at all. They just show up to press conferences. That's why we're going to talk about the media. That's why that is one of the things that we're going to talk about in the next few weeks, is media, the media impact and influence on government, and how government officials leverage the media, right? How they leverage the media. I've never received information about a town hall meeting from my members of Congress. All right. Rhonda says, I get U.S. mail from one of my employees. I reached out electronically and got a response from another. Okay. What state are you in, Rhonda? And that's on YouTube. All right. So while we wait on that, I'm going to go ahead and move. I needed to have this conversation. I need you to be thinking about these things. So there is some hope around the Department of Education, because Congress has not fully dismantled it. So Rhonda's in Texas with me. Okay, perfect. Congress has not fully dismantled the Department of Education, so there's hope. But we also need to be, what's the word? Girdled up in a way that has us prepared for what may come. All right. Valerie attended a virtual town hall with her representatives a month ago. I'm thinking she's talking about one, but she may be talking about a senator and her state rep, and she lives in Pennsylvania. All right. Okay. So when we look at Reconstruction, we have these amendments. These amendments get passed. We have some voting participation. When Ulysses S. Grant runs for president, we know he gets elected. And one of the reasons why he gets elected is because formerly enslaved people vote for him because he was the Union general. All right. He was the Union general. So he gets elected to president. We see agencies that were set up temporarily, such as the Freedmen's Bureau. We see them set up. We see them do some like sliver of work, very little bit, and then they're taken away. And as Reconstruction goes on, it doesn't last for a very long time. And the whole reason why we call it Reconstruction, it wasn't about Black people getting rights. Reconstruction was literally, we just went to war. Some people say we just went to war with ourselves. We had just gone to war with ourselves. I will never say that. The United States did not go to war with itself. The United States went to war with the United States of the Confederacy, right? And we can't rewrite history and act like that's not what happened. These folks pulled out of the Union, all right? They pulled out of the Union, and they started their own federal government, the United States of the Confederacy, and they declared war on the United States of America, and they went to battle. And then a winner was declared about 4 years later. So from April 1861 to April 1865, we have the Civil War. Okay, so Reconstruction was about rebuilding the nation after war. That means infrastructure. That means rebuilding relationships. That meant rebuilding policies or setting new policies for in order for the nation to move forward, right? Reconstruction is not a period that we can just stumble over and just conclude that it was merely about Black people, because as much as it was about us, it was also the rebuilding of the nation. It was the rebuilding of the United States infrastructure, people setting up homesteads, people having homesteads taken away from them, people being, because they had homesteads, right? So that period of Reconstruction is not something that you can just comb over. The period of Reconstruction is also the beginning and the early expansion of public education, both K-12, so to speak, as well as collegiate, right? A lot of institutions, not just what we call HBCUs today, but a lot of institutions were created or founded during the period of Reconstruction or shortly thereafter. Okay. It's a very pivotal time in our history, is Reconstruction, that period after the Civil War. I would say 7 years, those first 7 years, pivotal to the United States, especially as we look at education. All right, especially as we look at education. All right, so some of the things that came about during Reconstruction, and I think we talked about this last week. We talked about the Enforcement Acts. Did I get to the Enforcement Acts last week? Did we get to the Enforcement Acts last week? I don't recall. I think I mentioned it. But these were laws that were passed through Congress, so through both chambers, and they were designed to protect voting rights. So these are some of our earliest policies created to protect voting rights for Black people and to calm down some of that violence that Black people were experiencing, because people were hating that they had the right to vote. People were hating that they were free. They were just hating. They were ultimate haters. And most of this hate was coming, or a lot of this hate was coming through a particular group known as the Ku Klux Klan, or the KKK, right? A lot of the violence was coming as a result of the formation and activeness of the Klan. Okay, everybody got that? So the enforcement acts, there were three. There was the first one in 1870. The second one was a Klan Act. It's literally called the KKK Act. And then the third one was the second Enforcement Act. All right. One of the, how can I put this? What's Amos' last name? I can't think of his last name. One of the things that comes from these acts, or because of what's going on, is arguably the creation of what will become the FBI. But when we look at Amos, what is that man's name? Amos Ackerman. I couldn't think of his name. Amos Ackerman became U.S. attorney under Ulysses Grant. Okay, so this is Grant administration. So Amos Ackerman, as attorney general, his biggest thing was, or his biggest role, one of the biggest roles he played was enforcing these acts and kind of combating what would become Jim Crow. All right. Everybody got that? What would become Jim Crow? What's interesting about this is, so I always say we got to learn history because it be crazy. Ulysses S. Grant is the general of the Union Army, right? Amos Ackerman actually fought for the Confederacy. He opposed secession, but he fought for the Confederacy. Okay. Does that make sense? I'm trying to make sure y'all still here, y'all engaged. So initially, when he fought for the Confederacy, he was opposed to secession, but he fought for the Confederacy, and then he changed his mind about slavery, or at least that's how I was taught. Like, he had a change of heart, so to speak. He dealt with the KKK as well as he could, but there was so much pressure based on race to kind of cave into the demands of former Confederates in terms of negotiating how the country moves forward. Okay. But Amos Ackerman, that's somebody y'all should look up. I'm not going to go into him fully. But he was U.S. Attorney General under, what's his face, under Ulysses S. Grant. The other thing about the Enforcement Acts, that's when we saw federal troops get deployed, like to protect Black people in certain areas where intimidation was being used to keep them from voting. Federal troops were dispatched on behalf of, like, Black people. Because the thing that pissed people off the most, besides these folks having liberty and being freed, no longer enslaved, was not only are they no longer enslaved, y'all done gave them our land, or they've taken our land, and they've started their own townships and settlements. But more than anything was the fact that they could vote. And when they voted in somebody who stood up for them, air quotes. And that was the General Grant. Interestingly enough, I don't know too many Black people named Ulysses. I just thought I would say that. Okay. Hold on. Let me pull up my notes. The enforcement acts themselves, okay, these three acts were not strong. They were strong until they weren't. And so they never saw their full potential. Their full potential was never met, so to speak, because the culture still wanted to, for lack of better words, wanted to shit on Black people. The culture, the nation just could not deal with the fact that these Black people were being treated equally, right? And y'all see how this hand a little bit lower, because it was never equal. It still ain't equal. As much as we want it to be equal, it still ain't, right? And despite the 14th Amendment, right? So the 14th Amendment comes before these enforcement acts. In fact, these enforcement acts come about to reinforce what is in the 14th Amendment, what is in the 13th Amendment, what is provided in the 15th Amendment. These enforcement acts, these literal acts of Congress. So not only did Congress seal these rights into the United States Constitution, they had to circle back and take acts of Congress, these three acts of Congress, to ensure that those three constitutionally protected rights were provided. It wasn't enough. And we would see for the next 100 plus years, 140 years now, well, 160 years at this point, for 160 years, it still has not become level ground. There's not a level playing field, right? Despite what happened after Reconstruction with these three acts, there has yet to be a level playing field. People will say the election of Barack Obama. No, the election of Barack Obama, besides being historic, and we got a Black president, somebody that looked like us, who could speak to what it's like to witness the unaliving of a child, the red rumming of Trayvon Martin, amongst others, right? Beyond that, what we got when President Barack Obama was elected is what we have today. The results of electing President Barack Obama is Project 2025, which started as the Tea Party, right? But the election of Barack Obama isn't how we got Project 2025. Project 2025 was already in the works and had been seriously since 100 years after Reconstruction, since the 1960s, when all of those civil rights acts swept through Congress, right? And the Department of Education arguably was residual from, even though it came under the Carter administration, so it came like 12, 15 years later, it was a residual of what started during the civil rights movement in terms of those big acts of Congress to give at least the idea of some equality. All right. Yeah, Emily, another backlash, right? So I don't have this book here. I keep this book somewhere else, but there is a book. You get the PDF offline. If you get a physical copy, you're going to pay a nice coin unless you luck up on it. But there's a book, The Birth Dearth, Dearth, Birth Dearth. Get that book. And that's all I'll say about that. But get that book. It'll help you navigate and understand even more some of the things that we're looking at today. All right. So some of the things that I want to talk about regarding these Reconstruction Acts and the residuals and not Reconstruction Acts, these Reconstruction Amendments, as well as these acts. So the things created during Reconstruction and the residuals of them over the past 160 years. They may have been created and implemented because of the suffering of Black people in this country due to racism and more racism and prejudices and biases and violence. Cannot forget the violence, right? The residuals and the outcomes of those acts and amendments benefited people beyond just Black people. In some circumstances, if not most, it can be well argued that they have benefited other people at a higher rate than they've benefited Black folks. You see in our country, we've had immigrants for a while. We had like Chinese immigrants in the late 1800s. We had Japanese immigrants. We've, of course, had immigrants from throughout Europe. And each group of immigrants, they dealt with their own mistreatment from people here in the United States. So every time a new immigrant group came in, and before they assimilate, because they used to want all called white, but as they assimilate, you began to see how, or before they assimilate, you begin to see how they benefit from these certain things that were designed for Black people. In the 1950s and 60s, you see an influx of people from the Middle East and Africa coming to the country, and the Caribbean coming to the United States at a higher rate. You've always seen people from Mexico here in the United States because so much of the United States was Mexico, including where I am today. Mexicans and Black folks' experiences have kind of mirrored each other a lot historically in the United States when it came to housing discrimination. And we'll talk about some housing discrimination when we get to week 11, when we really get into Jim Crow. But you can even argue the Black codes were used against Mexican Americans. There is, there is a guy, he's on TikTok, he's also on Instagram. I can't think of his name. Let me see, he in my email. He's a University of Houston PhD. I think he got his doctorate from University of Houston. But he talks mainly, I would say 98% of his content is around Mexican American challenges that they face in this country. And a lot of times when I'm reading his content or listening to his content, it sounds so familiar because it mirrors the experiences of Black people so much, whether it's housing, whether it's voting, whether it's just day-to-day shopping or going to restaurants. the type of discrimination that both groups have faced have mirrored each other so much. And so that's why it's kind of upsetting to me and my homegirls. No, it's kind of upsetting to me when we don't have the camaraderie that we should share in community with one another. It shouldn't be where we're competing, because we have such a shared history in our experience, but also in our liberty. It was a Black or Afro-Mexican who ended slavery in Mexico, Guerrero. It was Mexico that gave shelter to runaway enslaved people. So we have a long history of community, but something has shifted. I don't know if it's just survival or if it's assimilate. I don't know what it is, and I'm not going to even try to answer it. But I think we need to get back to it, because I definitely know that we are stronger together. I believe in unity. But yeah. Gosh, what is his name? I cannot think of his name. Give me 1 second. Trying to go through my email. See if I can find it. Nope, don't see it. So, oh well. All right. So, Reconstruction. I want you. I can tell I'm not pulling at y'all today because the conversation is not lively, and it's okay. And I might just be too relaxed because I have been resting. But what I want you to do is I want you to look at Reconstruction through the aspect of or from these years. I want you to look at Reconstruction between 1868 and 1872. So 68 to 72. Is that 4 years? Yeah. I want you to look at that 4-year time frame and see what was gifted, so to speak, and what was taken away. All right. And if you need to go a little bit further past 72, that is fine. But I want you to look at that, the context of how these amendments and these acts struggled to be realized. Okay. How these things struggled to be realized. And then once they were realized, how they were constantly attacked. You see the 14th Amendment constantly attacked. You definitely see the 15th Amendment constantly attacked. In fact, before class started today, and I'm going to go back and read it, I had pulled up an article about the Attorney General here in Texas. So our Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, where members of our state legislature are looking to give him more power when it comes to elections. And I understand that to mean that election policies will become more oppressive just by looking at the record. All right. So, for instance, we had the 15th Amendment, the 19th Amendment, right? We get these amendments for the right to vote. Later, we get the Voting Rights Act, an act of Congress, the Voting Rights Act in the 60s. So we get the right to vote 1870, 1920, and then 1965, I want to say, is the Voting Rights Act. So we get these things. The Voting Rights Act is just like an enforcement. It's basically an enforcement of what these amendments already say. So you could arguably put that enforcement along with the enforcement acts of 100 years prior. But part of the enforcement in the Voting Rights Act was that it held counties with a history. So certain parts of certain states were held accountable because of their history, their practice, and policies concerning voting that was not inherently equally distributed. Counties that were known for lack of better words, intimidation or voter suppression, it made them have to meet certain requirements. And that took place up until 2013. 1870, 2013. You do the math. 1870, we get on this voting journey. In fact, when we get on this voting journey, it opens up voting to all men, not just men who are wealthy landowners, but all men. Women won't get it until the 20th century, the early 20th century. Then we have to reinforce what we've already created. We reinforce it with the Voting Rights Act in the mid 1960s. That comes with some prerequisites placed on counties that have a history of being oppressive when it comes to voting. Then in 2013, we get a Supreme Court decision. So here's one of your landmark cases that I've mentioned before, I believe, that we'll talk about more in week 13, but today we're going to talk about it. Is Shelby versus Holder. Shelby versus Holder 2013. I'm going to just go ahead and type this up. Shelby v. Holder. All right. So Shelby versus Holder in 2013. This is Shelby County, Alabama, which is south of Birmingham. So it's literally the suburbs. It's just outside of Birmingham, Alabama, which is Jefferson County, right? But Shelby versus Holder was a federal case where Shelby County, Alabama sued the U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder and sued to come from under those policies, those prerequisites that they were beholden to because of what was in the Voting Rights Act of the 1960s. So they come out with this decision that opens up the floodgates, so to speak, and allows this oppression to turn back up. All right. And what do I mean about oppression? Voter ID laws. Okay. I'm going to read some stuff to you right quick. So I'm going to read from Oye. Y'all know I like Oye. Here's Oye on your screen. The 14th Amendment protects every person's right to due process of law. The 15th Amendment protects citizens from having their right to vote abridged. That means diminished, abridged, or denied due to race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The 10th Amendment reserves all rights not granted to the federal government to the individual states. Article 4 of the Constitution guarantees the right of self-government for each state. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was enacted as a response to the nearly century-long history of voting discrimination. That's your black codes, your poll taxes, the literacy test, the intimidation, the threats when people went to go vote, the lynchings and unalivings that took place because people had the audacity to vote, or they even had the audacity to run for office. Y'all follow? Okay. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was enacted as a response to the nearly century-long history of voting discrimination. Section 5 prohibits eligible districts from enacting changes to their election laws and procedures without gaining official authorization. The reason why the official authorization was required is because those places had a reputation of being oppressive, of being discriminatory when it came to voting. Okay? Now, Section 4B defines the eligible districts as ones that had voting tests in place as of November 1st, 1964, and less than 50% turnout for the 1964 presidential election. Such districts must prove to the Attorney General or a three-judge panel of a Washington, D.C. District Court that the change neither has the purpose nor will have the effect of negatively impacting any individual's right to vote based on race or minority status. Section 5 was originally enacted for 5 years, but has been continually renewed since that time. So, for what was that? 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, 2000, 2005, 2010. All right, so 9 times it had been renewed. So we get this case in 2013, arguably probably 2011, 2012 it started, but 2013 is when it was decided. So it was accepted by the court in 2012. So yeah, 2011 is probably when it really got going. All right. Shelby County, Alabama filed suit in district court and bought both a declaratory judgment that sections 5 and 4B are unconstitutional and a permanent injunction against their enforcement. The district court upheld the constitutionality of the sections and granted summary judgment for the Attorney General. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit held that Congress did not exceed its powers by reauthorizing Section 5, and that Section 4B is still relevant to the issue of voter discrimination. So this is the question the court was asked in 2013. The court, the Supreme Court. Does the renewal of Section 5 of the Voters' Rights Act under the constraints of Section 4B exceeds Congress's authority under the 14th and 15th Amendments and therefore violate the 10th Amendment in Article 4 of the Constitution? And the court said yes. All right, the court said yes. Now, this was a split decision. It was not unanimous. It was a 5-4 split, very much so conservative versus liberal. And I really don't look at justices like that, but a lot of people do. So it was a 5-4 split with Chief Justice Roberts being on the majority. Let me get a sip of water. That was more than a sip. Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act is unconstitutional. Chief Justice John Roberts delivered the opinion of the 5-4 majority. The court held that Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act imposes current burdens that are no longer responsive to the current conditions in the voting districts in question. Although the constraints this section places on specific states made sense in the 1960s and 1970s, they do not any longer and now represent they do not any longer and now represent an unconstitutional violation of the power to regulate elections that the Constitution reserves for the states. As you know, elections are ran by the states. They're actually ran by the states through the county clerks or the county voting administrator, depending on your state titles. But the counties run elections on behalf of the states. Okay. The court also held that the formula for determining whether changes to a state's voting procedures should be federally reviewed is now outdated and does not reflect the changes that have occurred in the last 50 years in narrowing the voter turnout gap in the states in question. So 12 years ago, the United States Supreme Court reversed and gutted that particular part of the Voting Rights Act. Congress has yet to self-correct this. Okay. Congress has yet to self-correct this. They haven't been able to go back and fix it. But what happened immediately after the Shelby decision? One of the things that immediately happened was you saw legislators, state legislators, that means your state legislature. Legislators across many of the states that had previously been identified and held to Section 5 and 4B, you saw legislators in those states immediately file legislation to incorporate new requirements. And I'm going to focus on Alabama. Y'all know I like using Alabama as an example. So in Alabama, where this case took place, where Shelby took place, in Alabama, the governor was Robert Bentley. Okay. Robert Bentley ordered one of his employees, like, to do a feasibility, government, we love feasibility reports. I've done feasibility reports, but basically ordered a feasibility report on, well, let me stop. I'm gonna get back to feasibility. One of the first things they did was they passed laws that required particular identification to vote. Your voter registration card, no longer, that and some form of ID was no longer enough. You used to have your voter registration card and a bill in your name, like a utility bill and a work ID, and it was enough to vote. You could use your student ID and be able to vote. I know this because I've used my student ID. I used that in Texas when I was in graduate school. I've used my work ID in Florida. This is all prior to the Shelby versus Holder case. But and now I just use my passport because I'll be like, baby, Uno, Yahtzee. But I use my passport now. But these voter ID laws required specific identifications to vote. And most of us who live and go as we please, who are still in the workforce, we don't think anything of it. We have ID, we're registered to vote. We have our driver's license because we drive, especially throughout the South. Up north, people don't drive as much as we do down south. They have way more public transportation in a lot of the other areas of the country than we do, and they rely on it more than we do in the South. But that's nor here nor there. But there are rural areas where people don't have the accessibility as people in urban areas, right? So one of the things that Robert Bentley did after the legislature passed this voter ID law was he had this feasibility report done over the DMVs, so Department of Motor Vehicles, where you go get your driver's license. And he shut down based on this report, despite this report, because he was trying to see if it would save money to close them. And the guy was like, it really not going to have that much of an impact. Like, you're not going to really have no like huge landslide of savings, right? But he ordered the closure of these very places that were needed for these people to get these particular IDs. Now, he did this in a particular part of the state that has a significant history of voter impropriety, not impropriety on voters' behalf, but voter oppression. So we make a requirement and then we take away the thing, your accessibility to the thing that will help you meet that requirement. So when you think of older people, right? They don't drive anymore. They probably don't have a driver's license. So what do we do in that regard? Or let's say I'm a college student. I live here majority of the year, but my home is somewhere else. But I'm here majority of the year. I'm registered to vote here. But because my ID is not a Texas ID, I'm unable to vote. The only way I can vote is if I change my driver's license and all of that to Texas, right? Um, because my student ID is no longer valid. Like that's not an acceptable form of identification for voting. And so we saw these laws take off across the country. The reason why this is harmful is not everyone has accessibility to a place to go get an ID. And sometimes, because remember, we don't have poll taxes. Sometimes the requirement of these IDs and the cost it takes to get to a place to get it, in addition to the cost of it, it almost becomes like a poll tax because now it's costing me just to get an ID, just to vote. So it kind of dissuades or takes away people's desire or their oomph about voting, and it discourages them. All right. So hopefully that made sense. Yes, Amber also said they also closed polling places. So yeah, polling locations get closed. You know, we have here in Harris County 5 years ago during the pandemic, we had drive-through voting for the 2020 election. That is illegal now. It wasn't illegal then because it wasn't a concept until we invented it, right? Until our county came up with the idea of drive-through voting. But it became illegal to do. You can't do that anymore. It's been restricted. Why? So the question is, why would any state want to be restrictive about how people can vote? Regular citizens, constituents, regular schmegular, registered voters, why would you want to make voting more difficult? Why wouldn't voting be more expansive? Why is it that in the year of our good Lord 2025, can you not register to vote online in the state of Texas? I'm going to use the state of Texas for example, right? You can't register to vote online. You can type up the form online and print it, but you cannot submit it online to the Secretary of State for the state of Texas as a voter registration. You would have to print it and mail it in order to register to vote. Currently, that is the requirement, right? And so we have to look at these things and understand that these laws are not put in place by people who are looking to make voting accessible to everyone. They want you to jump through hoops. In the same way we hire people in our federal government, we hire people in our state legislators, in our state legislatures. Yes, Florida is the same way. Many states are. Many of these states are the states with the counties that had that history as to why Section 5 and 4B even existed in the Voting Rights Act, which the Supreme Court reversed in 2013, right? In their decision. They got rid of that. They said it's no longer needed. But now we're seeing all these other things happen. Like we have countywide voting here in Texas. So like I live in Harris County. I live in one neighborhood. I work in another. Instead of me trying to rush to leave the office to get way back across town in traffic, in Houston traffic, trying to go vote, I can vote right there where I work because we have countywide voting, right? We have countywide voting. I don't know how much longer we're going to have that. That is something that is being fought over, right? So voting is an issue that has been with us since Reconstruction. It has been with us since Reconstruction. The oppressive nature surrounding voting in this country. You know, we look at voting as just something we all can do, but do we ever look at it through the lens of why it is so strenuous and so difficult? And people will say, oh, it's fraud. But then when you look at the data, the fraud really ain't fraud in the way y'all trying to persuade it to be fraud. It's just not. It's just not. There are exceptions, but it's just not at the rate that people would have you to believe that it is. All right. So again, as we look at Reconstruction, we're not just looking at it based on what happened then. We're looking at the impact of Reconstruction and how it still impacts us today. So those amendments, those acts, and we continuously see acts being necessary to enforce these amendments. And I've told y'all once, I told y'all twice, I told you a million times. That 14th Amendment, baby. I don't know who your what's those folks called? Who your heroes are, who your characters are. I don't know if you're like a Black Panther fan or Superman, Batman, Captain America, but like whoever your superheroes are, they pale in comparison to the heroic nature of the 14th Amendment. And because the 14th Amendment has such a heroic nature about itself, the way it rescues and helps everyday people, not just citizens, but how it helps people, you will see why it's under attack. And if you don't realize that the 14th Amendment is under attack, you've got to be dead asleep. There's so many facets about the 14th Amendment that are under attack. Birthright citizenship, very first line of the 14th Amendment. You have people who are being deported who are citizens of this country, born here on this land, deported. People have been coming to this country. They call them anchor babies. Anchor babies ain't nothing new. Europeans been doing it for years. Russian. I remember a special on 60 Minutes where the Russian women were coming here, making sure they were here long enough to have them babies. All right. We have to uphold the Constitution ourselves as individual citizens and residents. We have to demand the upholding of the Constitution. We have to protect the Constitution. Yeah, members of Congress are sworn, lawyers are sworn. When you first start law school, depending on your state, you uphold, like if you join the bar association or the state bar, you swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States as well as of that state in which you live. And I think that's all fine, dandy, and great. But every single one of us that are present in this country, whether you went to law school, whether you're an elected official, you're a sworn peace officer, you have the responsibility of knowing this Constitution and protecting it. When someone goes off to fight at war, they're not going to protect the flag. Flag is just a symbol. It's just a symbol of the Constitution. What you're going to protect is the Constitution. Protect those freedoms, those rights, those privileges of the Constitution. And we get it mixed up. We get caught up in the symbolism. Symbols are cool, but they here today, gone tomorrow. They're not critical. All right. And people don't even protect the symbols the right way, because the way I see people wearing the United States flag as a t-shirt and as a hat, baby, that don't even go with the flag. The flag, what's the word I'm looking for? The policy. I can't even get the right word out, but there are policies about the United States flags, like the standard, the code, the flag code, right? So when you think about the Constitution, you as an individual present here in these United States of America, because this is still the United States of America, not America, the United States of America, because the whole hemisphere is the Americas. And you are a U.S. citizen. So you, as a U.S. citizen or a U.S. resident, you need to make sure that you're knowledgeable of the Constitution and that you protect it, that you hold other people accountable to it. And if they're not doing what you need them to do, you fire their ass. Get them out of there. Every member of Congress is super vulnerable right now, super duper vulnerable because of the climate in this country. Every state will have primaries in 2026. Some states will have primaries early. If the incumbent is not incumbenting in a way that is becoming of a public servant, meaning they are not protecting the Constitution in order to protect their constituency, not their own personal ideology, but the constituency, then primary them. Get a candidate, put a candidate in there to run against them in the primary and support that candidate and get them the hell up out of there. And then support that person in the general election in November of 2026. And if you have to do that every 2 years, then I'll be damned, do it. Because what we have going on is we have career politicians, people serving, especially in state government, and this not that class, but I'm gonna say you have people serving in the legislature 30 or more years, and that's not good. That my computer about to die. That's not good. So it's on us to hold them accountable. It's on us. It's on us to be active. It's on us to be checking our voter registration. Make sure that your voter registration is updated. Make sure everybody that is in your, if you don't do nothing else, just make sure everybody in your favorites. You know, we got our favorites on our phones. Make sure all of them are registered to vote. Their voter registration is up to date, right? Make sure your inner circle. Make sure y'all have a voting plan, all right? So I have a question from Courtney. Is there a way to find out how our members are voting while in office? If so, where can I find that information? You can, the website, I don't know the website right off, but you can find it. It is a congressional website. It's like a .gov site. But there's also a watchdog site. But you can literally just Google voting record for the 119th Congress. And then look up your member of Congress and you can see how they vote. We used to watch C-SPAN to see what's going on and how people are voting. You can do that too. But they're typically open records websites like that you can find. If you email me this, Courtney, I'll look it up, and email me your state. I'll look it up and send you well, not your state, but your rep, your U.S. representative, and your state, so I know who your senators are. I'll send it to you. All right. Any other questions? Any other questions? So Reconstruction, I would argue that Reconstruction has yet to end. We're still in a period of Reconstruction. And I don't even know if it's reconstruction or if it is construction. Like, we're still building. You got to remember, the United States is well, it's a toddler. The United States is a toddler when you compare it to other world powers. We are a toddler. We don't go back nearly as long as some of the other world powers. Like, here's the website. Thank you. It is clerk.house.gov. So it's there on the screen for you, Courtney. And thank you, 3 N's. Thank you for putting that up there for me. I appreciate that. All right. So let's see what other comments or questions we have. Oh, something about age limits. All right. Um, yeah, people serve a long time. You'd be surprised at some of the ages. I'm not gonna do it today, but I'm gonna get on it soon. Talking about here in Texas, for instance, the mayor of Houston served in the Texas legislature for 50 years, and now he's the mayor of Houston. 50 years in the state legislature. He started off in the House, he retired in the state Senate, and now he's the mayor of Houston. The average age in Houston is 33. I have no words, so that's why I'm making these faces, right? Um, Mitch McConnell. I don't even have to say nothing else. U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell. Nancy Pelosi. Because, see, I don't even have to take sides with political parties. It's time to sit down. But we don't have age limits. I think that's a part of just integrity. The integral part is go sit your ass down somewhere and pour into some other people. You should be developing and pulling people up. But power is a drug, y'all. Power is a drug. Here's a comment. You can also sign up via Library of Congress to get notification on bills on the floor in the House and Senate. Thank you, Hannah. I appreciate you. Oh my gosh. Tori says Capitol Hill is a senior center. I'm not about to play with you. All right. Now we can look at the age requirements for Congress and the president, right? What are the age requirements? Do y'all remember the age requirements? We went over them. Do you remember the age requirements for Congress? How old do you have to be in the House of Representatives? How old do you have to be to become president of the United States? I'm asking, so I want to see what y'all say. Okay, I got 35. What's 35? Which one is that? It's not 21 for. So here's the thing. Congress is two chambers. So you can't say Congress. You have the House of Representatives and you have the Senate. So when you say Congress, what are you talking about? So for the House of Representatives, how old do you have to be elected? Let me take y'all a little bit slower. For the House, you must be 25. For the Senate, you must be 30. And for president, how old do you have to be? $35. Okay. There we go. 35. All right. Now, most presidents in modern history weren't 35, right? They were the youngest to be elected was who? Teddy Roosevelt. He was 42. Okay. Barack Obama was relatively young as well. I mean, the White House aged that brother though. As was Kennedy. As was Kennedy. All right. He was relatively young when elected. Barack Obama right now is 63 years old. He became president almost 20 years ago. He was elected. Can y'all believe it's been almost 20 years since that man was elected president? He's elected in 2008. It is 2025. That's crazy, right? Mm. All right. George W. Bush was young. He was 54. He was in his 40s. Donald Trump was 70 when he was elected president. So we went from, let me see, I'm gonna look at the different years. Hold on. I'm gonna look at modern history. So I'm gonna look at Carter. I'm gonna go from Carter present. Carter was 52, Reagan was 69, Bush 1 was 64, Clinton was 46, Bush 2 was 54, Obama was 47, Trump was 70, Biden was 78, and Donald Trump 78. So are we going to change the age on all of them? Or are we just looking at Congress? Like, what are we doing? Or is it even necessary? Is it about restraint or is it about integrity? It's both. It's both. All right. So the first election I was able to vote in doesn't seem that long ago. Yeah. He came in with black hair and left with totally gray hair. Yep. All right, y'all. It's been real. It is 12:24 local time. What questions do you have for me as we get ready to wrap up and prepare for as we get ready to wrap up and I prepare for lunch. But as we get ready to wrap up, and I want to go over our course guide with you a little bit before I let you go. So what questions do you have for me, if any? No questions? That's good, y'all. I'm not complaining. I know we talked about doing a book review on Framed. How many of you have actually purchased it and read it? Or is that something y'all still want to do? Because I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to do it if y'all not interested in it. I can't make y'all do nothing because this is all volunteer. But how many of you all are still interested in doing a review on the book Frame? I'm just trying to get an idea so I can make plans to do that. I know originally we talked about doing it in late March. Late March is almost here. All right. I got one person who's finished it. Thank you, Courtney. Danielle has it, not finished yet. Okay, so a few of you want to do a book review. So let's look at April. I have a calendar. Hold on. I'm trying to find a calendar. Let's look at the week of April 10th. Framed is the name of the book. Framed, Framed, by John Grisham and Jim McCloskey. Let's look at the week of April 10th to kick off the book review. So have it read in 1, 2, basically 1, 2, let's say 3 weeks. So by April 14th, have it read. All right. Have it read by April 14th, framed. I'm not sure. It's probably an electronic copy of it available. But let's try to get that read so that we can do the book discussion. And then email me if you want in on the discussion, because we're going to do that different. We're not going to do it in this forum. We're going to do that through Zoom, because I need voices. We're going to do that through Zoom. So email me if you would like to be a part of that. And if you're watching this on a replay and you don't get the emails, you don't have my email address, even though I've said it like 3 times on this video, make sure you go to the description here on YouTube and click the Google form and make sure you register. That way you get the course materials and you get the updates on a weekly basis. And then you can communicate with me via email. All right. All right. Any other questions, concerns, ideas? I'm hungry, guys. My stomach is about to start talking to y'all. All right. Sounds great. I thank you for your time today. We're just shy of 2 hours. Y'all know I've been trying to get us an hour and a half, 2 hours for our class time. I really want to get it less than an hour and a half, like an hour and 15 minutes. And maybe we'll get there one day. All right. So that is it from me. It has been my pleasure chatting with you today. TikTok, stay on. YouTube, I'll see you later. Have a good one.